Welcome to Stoa Conversations. My name is Caleb Pontiveros, and today is going to be a solo episode on 4 ways to be happy. Some quick notes on Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Book 2, Section 16. But before we dive into it, some housekeeping or a brief announcement. Michael and I will be moving Stoa Conversations to a cadence of once every 2 weeks. So if you don't see a conversation next Tuesday in your inbox or in your podcast player, do not be alarmed. We will have another episode out the following weeks. We're dialing back the frequency of the podcast episode a bit to focus on the Stoa letter on Substack and also the Stoa app, which you can, as always, find on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store by searching Stoa, S-T-O-A. So do follow those if you like more frequent updates. But we'll be focusing on those while juggling other demands of life. So we're moving this podcast to a slightly less frequent schedule. As always, if you have any feedback regarding this change or other ideas, do let us know at stoa@stoameditation.com. All right. So there's an interesting list of 4 items in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations 2:16, and one can read it as a recipe for becoming happy by means of avoiding unhappiness. I do think that can be a useful strategy often. Instead of trying to aim for the thing itself, try to avoid whatever takes you away from that aim, from that target. And that's what Marcus Aurelius provides here as a list of 4 things that make us unhappy. Here they are. First, be frustrated at whatever happens. Second, do not live well with other people. Third, let yourself be overpowered by pleasure or pain. Finally, do things without a purpose. In Marcus Aurelius's words, the passage goes as follows. The soul of a man does violence to itself, first of all, when it becomes an abscess, and as it were a tumor on the universe, so far as it can. To be vexed at anything that happens is a separation of ourselves from nature, in some part of which the natures of all things are contained. In the next place, the soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man or when even moves towards him with the intention of injuring, such as are the souls of those who are angry. In the third place, the soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or pain. Fourthly, when it allows any act of its own and any movement to be without an aim, and does anything thoughtlessly and without considering what it is, it being right that even the slightest things be done with reference to an end. And the end of rational animals is to follow the reason and the law of the most ancient city and polity. So, before listing these 4 items, Marcus Aurelius notes that the soul does violence to itself. It does violence to itself when it becomes an abscess. A powerful image. An abscess, a tumor on the universe. In other words, we harm ourselves, which is another way of saying we make ourselves unhappy when we fail to respect the nature of the universe, which is of course a very big idea, and get slightly smaller and say we're failing to respect our own nature. And we come to this idea of our own nature in the first item, just being frustrated at whatever happens. If you want to be unhappy, be frustrated whenever your desires are not met. If you take the reverse of that, cease being frustrated when your expectations are violated. And the way to do that, to be more precise, the Stoic instruction for actually achieving this is, of course, changing our desires. Desires express what we value, they capture what we value, and in order to not be vexed at whatever happens, frustrated at whatever happens, we need to invest less in externals and more in the decisions we make, the thoughts we have, which, of course, are about the external world. So the thought is to care well about externals and express that care by making excellent decisions. And you can think of people who become irate, angry, disappointed at a range of different external events, whether it's small defeats or larger struggles. And whenever you're tempted to be like those people or make the kinds of decisions that would lead to unhappiness, Marcus Aurelius notes that you should remind yourself that to act in this way, to make decisions like this, to think like this, is to separate yourself from your nature, which is a abstract way of saying this is not who you are meant to be. The second item, do not live well with other people. If you want to be unhappy, turn away from others. Or worse, perhaps, hurt them. Your happiness requires living in accordance with your own nature and the nature of the world as a whole, which of course means living well with other people. And I do think there's a sort of common sense theme to this, which is just that even in the conventional way of seeing a successful life, a happy life, people who treat others well tend to live well. At least, they seem satisfied with their lives, and often their lives are admirable if they're really living well with others. But that's a probabilistic matter. And I think the common sense approach, common sense definition of happiness, which includes, externals, some amount of external success, I would take that to be the common sense account of happiness, which the Stoics reject, is just a probabilistic thing. There's no guarantee that you need to live well with others in order to achieve conventional success or happiness. Perhaps it helps, but we likely can all think of examples of people who, either in our own lives or in myth or public figures, people who have obtained conventional success, perhaps even psychological satisfaction, despite not living well with others, turning away from others, or damaging them. The Stoic view is that these people are not happy, and they're not happy because they are not living in accordance with their nature. They're not who they were meant to be. And any psychological satisfaction that they have with their life is grounded in an illusion. And in a serious sense, perhaps such lives are not enviable. And I do think that's, sometimes the Stoic position seems counterintuitive, but I do think it is correct that at least many people attracted to Stoicism wouldn't want to switch places with the people who have external success, but have turned away from friends, family, society, and thereby turned away from themselves. There's a serious kind of disharmony both between them and the world, but also internally. And a Stoic is aiming to achieve that harmony. So, I think that's always a useful metaphor. If you want to be unhappy, don't live well with others. Live a discordant life. Alternatively, Marcus Aurelius reminds us to be happy. Live well with others. The third item, the soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or pain. Always a good reminder by the Stoics to master oneself, develop self-control, and if you wish to be unhappy, go in the other direction. Give way to any adversity. Give up in the face of any adversity, or give in to any temptation. Perhaps a route for short-term satisfaction, but not long-term happiness. Letting your life be ruled by pleasure or pain at each moment is not ideal, according to the Stoics, of course. It's better to have a sense of perspective and be able to apply principles, in other words, think rationally in each situation. Take hold of our feelings before they take hold of us. Hold fast to your purposes, whatever burdens you have. Hold firm to your purpose, whatever arises. Elsewhere, Marcus Aurelius says, "Be like the promontory, which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." If you want to be unhappy, give in. Give way. Last item. Another way to become unhappy is to do things without a purpose. Act on a whim. Have no sense of principles, but make things up as you go. Of course, the issue with that is that purposeless actions lead to a purposeless life. Of course, although there's a sense in which we always need to wing things from time to time, uncertainty is a fact of human life. Living according to our nature for the Stoics means seeking to make sense of the world, living in accordance with it, and that requires possessing reasons for our action. And sometimes this source of language is abstract, but reasons are really just things that make our projects meaningful and guide our decisions. They ground our lives, good reasons. The sorts of thing that, you did some action because you wanted to be a good friend, and being a good friend is one of those many things that makes life worthwhile. So sometimes people also think of purposes as much broader projects. I want to achieve some grand external success to my life. That's my purpose. But I think the Stoics, in a way, are quite common sense and see a lot of our purposes as, ordinary things. Being a good brother, good parent, good friend, excellent coworker, citizen. And each of these things can give a purpose to life. So I think you see a mix of the Stoic common sense and ambition here, which is useful. So there are 4 ways to become happy by avoiding unhappiness. I think this is a useful frame to play with. Sometimes you want to target happiness, other times you want to avoid what causes misery. And play with those frames from time to time. Play with them and see if either helps you see things anew in a fresh way. Let's end with reading this passage from Marcus Aurelius again. This is 2:16. The soul of a man does violence to itself first of all when it becomes an abscess and, as it were, a tumor on the universe so far as it can. To be vexed to anything that happens is a separation of ourselves from nature, in some part of which the natures of all things are contained. In the next place, the soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man, or even moves towards him with the intention of injuring, such as are the souls of those who are angry. In the third place, the soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or by pain. Fourthly, when it allows any act of its own and any movement to be without an aim, and does anything thoughtlessly and without considering what it is, it being right that even the smallest things be done with reference to an end. And the end of rational animals is to follow the reason and the law of the most ancient city and polity. Thanks for listening.